Hi friend, we have a new website live, transfieldguide.com. There you can find episodes with show notes, our resource page, and links to both our Amazon wishlist and our PayPal donation. If you'd like to support the show, please consider a one-time or recurring donation. Every penny helps. The information and opinions presented in this podcast are based on research done at a particular point in time. The fields of medicine, surgery, psychology, etc. are constantly evolving as new studies and movements happen. Please take into account the year of any particular episode's publication, and as new information presents itself, we will do our best to release updated episodes on the topics. Listener discretion is advised for references to medical terminology of body parts. Unless otherwise stated, no one speaking on this podcast is a medical or legal professional and cannot provide medical or legal advice. Welcome to the Trans Field Guide. Today on the show, I have James Din, aka JD, a licensed clinical social worker in the state of Texas. Thank you for being on the show. I know that you do social worker, but you also do counseling as well.
Yeah, so I'm a clinical social worker, and so I primarily do counseling. Okay. My old title was Professional Counselor 1. Now I'm actually Assistant Director. That's for a Student Counseling Services department at a university, which shall remain nameless since I'm not representing my university at this moment.
So when you do counseling for the students, do you end up handling a lot of trans issues or LGBT issues in general?
Yeah, a lot of our LGBT students that seek counseling wind up seeking me out specifically because I do openly identify as queer and genderqueer, just so that way they know that it's someone that is familiar from a first-person perspective. Yet at the same time, I very much trust my colleagues to be sensitive, if not necessarily as experienced in the particular issues that come up. They're still going to be very skilled as clinicians.
In your counseling practice with the students, do you do any letters for HRT?
Yeah, I've done a handful of them actually. For HRT, also for top surgery. Mm-hmm.
What is generally considered to be the, quote, normal practice for assessing someone for HRT? Or top surgery?
I wish I could say that there was a really good standard that's out there. There is, of course, the WPATH standards of care, but those are guidelines. The criteria for that is actually still pretty open. And then so much of it winds up depending on what the doctor is looking for. Because I know I get put in this position of gatekeeper, but it's like a gatekeeper for another gatekeeper. Which is just kind of odd and bizarre, where they might be asking for so documented history that extends a particular amount of time, where that's not necessarily something that's required by all doctors. Some are just wanting more of a general screening just to make certain that any coexisting concerns, for instance like anxiety or depression or maybe trauma, is something that is being handled and is under control. Then there might be the more kind of extreme examples of someone might be living with schizophrenia, for instance. And that's just kind of one of those things where it's where we just kind of just screen for okay, is the dysphoria related to an incongruence with their gender, or is this experience something that's actually related to something else? Most of the time, it's pretty clear. And so I know some of it winds up ultimately being born out of what hoops does the insurance company want people to jump through, and then also what's going to reduce liability.
Always got to watch out for that liability.
Yeah, that's an unfortunate truth in professional life.
Do you ever have clients that come in with a completely non-trans related thing that they want to focus on for their counseling, and then along the way end up realizing, oh, by the way, I apparently am trans or non-binary, or insert gender in here?
Oh, that's definitely come up. Both where they've worked with me and then we wind up talking a lot more about gender. It's oh, hey, let's start investigating this a little bit more. I've had a few cases where they've met with another clinician and then that came up and they said, oh, hey, we have a clinician that's going to be really familiar with this. Are you interested in working with them? And so I wind up getting some referrals that way. Yeah, that's that's one of the wonderful benefits of being part of a team. We start to learn each other's different specialties. So that way we're able to say to the students, hey, I want to make certain that you're getting the best care possible. Let's take a look at your schedule if you're interested in meeting with this other counselor that might have more experience with, I don't know, an athletics background, a more experience with a medical background, etc.
Have you ever had clients who, they have like the opposite? They initially come in and be like, I am trans all the way, and then throughout the process of counseling kind of come to realize, actually, I may have jumped the gun on that a little bit.
As in no longer identifying as trans?
Yeah. Or changing the specifics of their gender that they identify as. Like, maybe they start out as saying trans male or trans female, and then later on it evolves to more of a non-binary.
Oh yeah, definitely. So many people, they begin this counseling and they're just beginning to explore what transgender even means. There are plenty that already come in like with tons of their own research, etc. It's like, okay, yes, I'm able to explore this and define the various intersectional identities of being demi-girl, pansexual, all those different things, yes. While others are just like, so I know I'm not a boy. And then the only term that they know is like, okay, so transgender or transsexual. And then we wind up talking about like, oh, what are the terms that you are familiar with? What brought you to the term that you use now? I get a lot of people who say like, well, I use this, but I know that it's not quite that, but it's just the best way that I'm able to explain it to everyone else. But then they haven't had the opportunity to actually explore the demi-genders or gender queer or all the various terms that are out there, gender adjacent.
I haven't heard gender adjacent before. What is gender adjacent?
I like that one because it's the idea that they might be like male adjacent. So it's like they can see this experience of male somewhere in this nebulous zone and they feel next to that, but not part of that. Just to describe, I guess, the liminality. So anthropology has these wonderful terms where we've gotten like that intersectionality. How do all of these different things that we recognize overlap? But then also, how do we recognize when we are at the edge of something or moving from one category to another or existing in this in-between space? I think I relate to that a lot with my own gender as being non-binary, where in some ways it makes more sense to describe how I'm not connected to certain things than as I define what I am connected to.
From anecdotal evidence from talking to various people, the concept of knowing what you're not before you start to really explore what you are seems to be very common, not just with trans people, but with personality development in general, where it's just like, I know what I don't like, so what do I do like?
So I have brought up the CAS model of identity development sometimes with my clients. I've even done, I call it Rainbow Chat, which was a drop-in support group, as well as I've also done a therapy group where I brought in the CAS model, which is originally specific to the LGB identity development, but I think the elements of it really can be applicable to a lot more. It just makes sense for a lot of people. Yeah, with the CAS model, so a lot of people, as they're trying to figure out how to form this identity, one that wasn't immediately recognizable since birth, with the CAS model, the first stage of that winds up being identity confusion. This idea that, oh, I feel different, but it's not necessarily that I feel like that. It's just, oh, I feel different. Next, identity comparison, where it's more like, oh, I might be like them. So it's like, what is that? So there might be a lot of curiosity. There might also be a little bit of suspicion. Next up is identity tolerance, where I call it like more, I'm probably like them, but I don't want to deal with that. And at that phase, it might be like, oh, I'm probably like that, but I'm going to try to find every way that I'm not and not have to deal with the repercussions of what that may mean. But at the same time, it's like, okay, I'm going to start to tolerate that this is part of my identity. To identity acceptance, where, okay, I am that. Now I have to deal with it, which can have a certain sense of acceptance and starting to move forward. It can also be a lot of that dread, because at that point you might still be in the closet and worried about like, oh, how do I manage being a part of this group on the inside, and who am I going to be able to trust with that? Next is identity pride, where I am this, and now everyone else has to deal with it. So yeah, in that moment, again, could be really exciting. This can also be a stage of development where people can be very argumentative and combative, especially for allies or non-allies, where coming out and saying like, wait, no, you have to deal with this. It can result in a lot of that conflict. And then the last stage in that model is identity synthesis, which is this idea that, okay, I am this, or just I am. And I'm also that, and I'm also that, and I'm also that. Some people, they almost see it almost like it's going backwards. Or just like, well, why isn't this so important to you anymore? Why isn't that you're not going to the Pride Parade all the time? Or why aren't you going to these protest marches, etc.? But at that point, it's been synthesized into that person's identity, where, like, for me, I am genderqueer, I'm also pansexual or just queer, I am a social worker, I am Vietnamese, I am from Utah, all those different things. It winds up being just kind of one aspect among many. But then with all of those different stages, it's not necessarily that the goal is to move from that stage 1 all the way through stage, what was that, 6? But just understanding where you are in that, where some people, they want to be more in that stage of acceptance of like, okay, this is my identity, and I don't necessarily need anyone else to know about that, to deal with it, etc. I guess that would be like people who go stealth, and so people who like, that's not really an identity that they share with others, and there's nothing wrong with that.
What I find fascinating about that concept is you do have the people who went stealth and they skipped over the this is who I am and all of you have to deal with it, went straight into stealth, and now is circling back to that identity pride phase of it.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily, like, it's just a model. Yeah, it's like Monty Python, it's only a model. And so just a general flow that often happens to people, but just to kind of recognize, oh, everyone's journey is so different. And some people, yeah, that pride has this function in their life at that particular time. And then there are other times where being in the closet actually may have a very special function in that person's life at that time. I think so often we're pressuring people to be out. And yes, I do believe that winds up being one of the most powerful acts that we can to create social change is just being open. And at the same time, we might need to just protect ourselves.
Like this episode? Tell someone about it. Resources referenced in this episode can be found in the show notes at transfieldguide.com. Stay safe, and remember that I'm proud of you.